Hi, my name is Katie McLaughlin, founder of the McLaughlin Method. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the importance of increasing emotional intelligence and give you some tips on how you can start to increase your emotional intelligence today. Emotional intelligence is one of those things that is being talked about and has been talked about for a number of years in the workplace. So I want to really think about, though, what does that mean? Now, I'm not going to give you a definition. You can look those up online or in a textbook. But if we really think about it, it's about having an ability to apply intelligence and thinking to our understanding of people's emotions, right? And to have a sensitive or a deference towards the emotions of others when we interact with them. Now, you might be thinking that in the workplace, there aren't room for emotions. But I really want to challenge that because in the workplace, we don't show up as a person devoid of emotions or feelings. We don't get to really completely leave behind our emotions, especially today where so many of us are working from home. We are faced with so many different challenges now where our emotions are literally on our sleeves, behind those closed doors, and around at all times. So it's even more important that we can start to really think about how someone's emotional well-being may be coming into play in different situations. Now, some of those ways that it might be coming into our work lives is if someone is overly frustrated easily. That frustration may have nothing to do with the scenario. Especially in these post-pandemic times, that's when I'm recording this video, we're all facing so much more stress and a collective trauma, and we're carrying that with us every single day. And there's a lot we can't control in our lives. So sometimes the things at work, our interactions with coworkers, become this subconscious opportunity to exert some kind of control. Even if that control or us exerting that kind of control may be harmful to others. So one of the first things that we can do when we think about increasing our emotional intelligence is to look at taking separation between the event that might trigger our own emotions and the way that we respond. Because typically our initial response is going to be one of pure emotion, pure reaction. And that reaction may not always be the most productive, the most approachable, or the most appropriate for that situation. So the first thing I want you to try when thinking about increasing your emotional intelligence, when something happens, that could be a piece of feedback you receive, that could be something that you're receiving from someone else, like they have given you a deliverable and you're looking at it. It could also be in your interactions live with someone. I want to encourage you to first take a deep breath. We don't actually breathe enough as humans. We're often holding our breath and keeping ourselves and our breath kind of restricted or constricted. And breath is one of the fastest ways to tap into our nervous system. The vagus nerve is one of the big nerves that goes throughout our body, and taking a big deep breath can be a really good way to start calming our nervous system down. Because of course, many of those reactions are coming from our nervous system responses. Now, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I've done a lot of study and self-study on the way that our brains and our bodies respond to different stimuli. And the more that you can take the opportunity to think about how you respond, the better you're going to be able to understand others. And of course, understand yourself. Now, so taking a deep breath, that's kind of the first tip. The next tip is to also try to see if you can ask yourself a question, kind of reflect on what just happened, what input or response you're receiving, and naming that reaction. So if something happens in work and you feel like you've been attacked, that's something that many of us can often feel, especially if we're in a workplace that might be a bit more toxic than we would prefer in terms of our working relationships. So, if we might feel like we've been attacked, it's important to name that because once we can name something, then we can start to shift it. Now, I've been talking a lot about ourselves, right? Now, another piece of emotional intelligence is also about recognizing that others, so people outside of ourselves, have different emotions and different responses. Everything I've just shared, you can take when you think about others. If someone snaps at you, could you take a breath and consider why might they be snapping? Could it be something else, right? Some ways that we could teach emotional intelligence could come down to reading body or nonverbal cues. It could be around hearing different tone within someone else's voice. That's also super important. I talk about these different things within my workshops at the McLaughlin method. But I also really want to emphasize the importance of perspective when it comes to emotional intelligence. Each of us has a very unique perspective. None of us can really step into the shoes of someone else and know what's going on. We could make some judgments or some assumptions, but we all know what happens when we assume. We may assume incorrectly. And especially because of the cultural awakening that also has happened this year around Black Lives Matter and the implications that race has on our perspective, we have to be really considerate and be really cautious if we're going to make assumptions about where someone's frustration or anger might be coming from. Now, I know that that might be difficult, but the best way that we can actually understand where someone's coming from is to ask. I'm going to go back to that example of, someone snapping at you. Now, if you use my model, you'll notice I just took a deep breath, right? So first, take a deep breath. Name it. That person snapped at me. I feel attacked, right? Now, the next thing would be to ask. So an example of that might be to say, I'm hearing or I'm experiencing what you just said as feeling like you snapped at me. And I'm not sure why. Could you help me understand what's going on? Or could you say that in a different way? We're often so unaware of how we're coming across to others because it takes a lot of mental energy to both think, respond, change our initial responses. And there's only so much bandwidth that any of us have in order to really respond or change our responses. So I encourage you to start opening up the dialogue with folks around you, and especially to even get some distance if you need to. You might not feel comfortable asking that type of question in the moment, but that would be a goal. That would be something to work towards. Now, if you needed to revisit that later, I would encourage you to really focus on the facts when you talk about something. Now, really kind of all of this can be used in any different work situation, whether you are meeting with a peer, you're meeting with a manager, or if you are a manager, people who you manage. And especially when you're working in a group setting, keep all these different things in mind, and you'll start to be able to regulate yourself, and you'll be able to start noticing different reactions that others might have in different situations. I hope you've enjoyed this video on how to increase emotional intelligence, and I'll see you next time.